Eric Scot Tryon is a writer and editor from San Francisco, California. His debut novel, I'm The Undertow, is forthcoming from Central Avenue Press in May 2026. His short fiction has appeared in literary journals such as Mid-American Review, Indiana Review, Ninth Letter, Florida Review, Glimmer Train, the Los Angeles Review, and others. His work has also been selected for the Wigleaf Top 50 and the Best Small Fictions and Best Microfiction anthologies. He is also the founding editor of the literary magazine Flash Frog. He is represented by Carleen Geisler at PS Literary Agency. Eric, thank you so much for coming into the corner booth with us.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My own personal history, I've been back writing a lot more than I was with the pandemic. And Flash Frog was one of my first discoveries. And I know that Flash Frog is something that you started in 2021, correct?
Yes. January, yeah. So just the beginning of 2021.
We're very close to your new book coming out. How's that feeling?
Oh, it's a mix of many emotions. I'm excited. I'm anxious. I'm overwhelmed with all of the prep and stuff that has to happen. But super excited is kind of the biggest emotion. I keep reminding myself to enjoy every step of the way because this book has been decades in the making. So I don't even know, maybe like 20 something years ago, I caught a headline in the newspaper. It was, this isn't a spoiler. It's back of the jacket copy, but I saw an article of a young man who got in an accident where he hit and killed a cyclist. And I think they deemed the cyclist was old and it wasn't the driver's fault. It was kind of one of those freak accidents thing. Nobody was charged. It was just this awful tragedy. And even though he wasn't at fault and he wasn't charged, I couldn't imagine the guilt that he felt and that he had to live with that for the rest of his life when he did nothing malicious or nothing wrong. So that was like a seed that planted in the back of my head. And then I went along my normal life, and every once in a while I thought about that driver in that moment, and I kind of thought, if I ever write a novel, I want to explore that character and what that must be like. And then finally one day I started it, and real life happens, and the book kind of went on and off, and writing it and then stepping away from it. And you mentioned the pandemic was when you kind of really started writing, and the pandemic was a big catalyst for me too, because I was working at a big corporate job, kind of boring, paying the bills, 9 to 5 kind of thing. But I got laid off when a giant, kind of pandemic layoffs were happening. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna really, I was in a situation where I was like, I'm going to really be able to like focus on being a writer and being an editor and trying to make that like my full-time job. So that really escalated, finishing the novel, polishing it up, getting it out to agents, and everything really, really sped up at that point. But the idea happened, I swear, 20 years ago, and I just had this character in my brain. Yeah, and now I've been living with him. Now I get to share him with everybody in a couple months.
That's exciting. I wanted to ask you, because I just recently was introduced to your work, and so I've been reading some stories. And first of all, really good stuff, obviously. Like, look, Water's Wet. It's very good. One of the things I was eager to ask you was about your inspirations, because it's so, like, it comes off so clean and effortless when you read it. And I know that there's a lot of effort that goes into making it seem effortless, but the characters are so relatable. The situations are so realistic that I found myself wondering, God, did any of this actually happen to him? So could you talk a little bit about where you get your inspiration? How much of this is autobiographical versus you just really immersing yourself in another character?
Yeah. Well, the inspirations, I think, as with most writers, come from all over the place and like the most random places. It could be an overheard conversation at the grocery store. It could be scrolling social media and I see a passing photograph or a headline, and I don't even delve into it, but it seeds itself into my head. And then I'm mostly a writer who writes several drafts in my head before I actually start putting anything onto the paper, so to speak. So I feel like when I'm actually starting to write the story, it doesn't feel like a first draft. It feels like a third or fourth draft because I've internalized it for so long. It's a huge compliment to hear you say that. Maybe some of the stuff is autobiographical, but I really don't write stuff from My own life, I think the stuff that comes from my own life is things like settings. I'm a very California-focused writer. A lot of my stuff takes place in California. That's where I've spent my life, north, south, central, all over California. But the actual characters and what happens to them are generally not stuff that's happened to me. A funny story recently, or not recently, but a while ago, I published a story about a young teenager in Amsterdam and the shenanigans that happened with him. And I had a reader reach out and say, I'd love to hear more about your time in Amsterdam. That story really meant a lot to me. And I said, I've never been there. I've never had any of those experiences that the character had. And he was like blown away. He's like, what do you mean you've never been there? You wrote it so well. So again, that's a super high compliment.
That's excellent. No, it really does feel like lived experience. And so it must point to your ability to really imagine a character's circumstance and inhabit them in such a way that you can, kind of draw out what would a person who thinks this way do next. And I think that's a really strong, skill to have as a writer. Is that something that you've always, first of all, am I right? But if I am right, is that something that you have developed over time, something that you have innately? Like, how do you build that skill?
That's a good question. And I will say when it comes to the novel, again, this main character has this horrible tragedy happen, and then he ends up meeting the mother of the young man he kills, and they start a relationship of sorts. I won't go too far into that, but I was really kind of paranoid that it would come off as inauthentic because I hadn't had any of those experiences that either of those two main characters have had. And I almost became obsessively internalizing and trying to get into the mindset and the emotional state of these characters. So much so when I'd be in some of the big chapters, I could not sleep at night. I'm just like obsessing over trying to feel what that would feel like, because probably just had a fear of like, people aren't going to believe this. People aren't going to, people that have gone through these things will say that's not how it feels, or that's not how it happens. Or, whether it's good or not, a fear or a paranoia really sets me into those characters' mindsets. When it comes to Flash, I probably don't obsess about it for as long or as much. I'm really in the moment, something that's quick and sharp and in focus. And I don't know if it's something that's consciously happening. I just try to really put myself in that moment.
So you talk about this internalizing, and that is really cool. I really want to pick at that. It feels like, and I'm going to put words in your mouth. This will be fun. So what Eric is saying is that you're kind of
better than I can anyway.
No, I doubt that. But that you're ruminating on these characters. You're really kind of allowing them to play in the sandbox until you feel like you're at a point where, okay, I can get this person or this situation or this problem down on paper, and we can start to kind of work at it. What does that feel like? And really, I am saying feel, not because it doesn't sound like an academic exercise. It sounds like, I guess we're ready now. But like, there's got to be some sort of feeling in you where you know that you've sort of cooked the turkey, like it's ready to go. Yeah. What does that feel like? How do you know?
I think, again, that's something that I'm just kind of realizing with myself with this great question, is that I think it comes when I stopped trying to kind of ruminate and marinate in this character, and I start writing actual paragraphs in my head or dialogue in my head, and then I will I get busy with real life, and I go back to that, and I almost kind of revise that, and I'm actually writing actual sentences in my head, and I'm almost trying to memorize it, like maybe an actor tries to memorize their lines. So I think, okay, this is silly. I need to start writing this stuff down instead of trying to memorize it. So there's like a point where it comes from just like exploring these characters and these feelings in my head to the point where I'm starting to write actual words of either dialogue or exposition, again, in my head. And it's like, okay, it's time to get these words onto the page.
Yeah. It sounds like you're expressing a confidence in knowing the character, their purpose, their direction, that kind of thing. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. That is the exact topic that I wanted to talk about, or that you asked that question, because it blows me away that you were just saying, that you might have like a draft or two worked out in your head before you get into that, maybe for the shorter fiction. And that just, I would be so afraid of losing an idea. But it almost seems as if you're losing the idea, it must not have been a good one to keep for the story that you're working on. Is that?
Yeah. That's what I tell myself. Yeah, that's what I tell myself, because I'm sure I have lost ideas, and maybe some of them were my best ones. But I'd like to, to stay sane. I tell myself, well, if it didn't stick, then it wasn't worth sticking. Yeah. So I know some people are kind of the other way, where they obsessively write everything down, and maybe their notes app is full of ideas or one-liners, or they have folders on their laptop like that way. But I don't know. It's just not the way I naturally work. I'm much more internal. I think by the time I do start writing, again, it doesn't feel like a first draft. I really analyze and agonize over every line, even right away, because that feels like I've already lived with these moments in my head for a while, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting to me. I don't even know if I've told you this, Art. Did I tell you I started swimming to try and, get in some sort of modicum of shape?
No.
And I've found that's I know, surprise. Let's just talk about swimming. So one of the things that's been happening is that I've found it as a great space to just think about stories that I'm working on or trying to work out problems, because suddenly I'm just not in front of the piece that I've been working on. But now it's getting to the point where I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm like middle of the pool. I'm near drowning because I can't swim anyway. And I'm just like, I've got to remember that this character says, this one thing. And so it just is so interesting to me. Is there a place that you have, or an activity that you do, or an exercise that you go through, where you find you do that best work of trying to work through the pre-drafts before they get written down?
Yeah, in fact, it's funny you mentioned swimming, and I thought in my head, I was like, oh, that's much more beneficial because you're getting exercise as well. Because for me, it happens when I'm driving. I will often click the radio off, or a pod, whatever I'm listening to, I'll turn it off. I often take kind of the long way home, or kind of get lost in the city and just drive around, because driving is, obviously by now it's so second nature that it's not something I have to really think about, but yet your body's still engaged and your senses are still engaged in something else that for some reason it frees up parts of my mind that can work things out. And I'm also, you're confined in this car, so I'm not distracted by things on my phone or the screen or what other people around me are doing. I have found, and this is completely not a conscious thing, is that anytime I'm really stuck on how to get to that next scene or how to work this character out, I have had countless light bulb moments happen in the shower. I don't know how many times I come out, my wife teases me, I come out and I figured it out, she's like, what are you talking about? And for some reason it happens in the shower sometimes.
Yeah, there's I love driving as well, and sometimes when it happens when I'm not thinking about something, like something out of the blue, I'll just sort of randomly be thinking about, and then it's suddenly I'm just telling my own wife, I'm like, can you take a note for me? And she knows. She's like, uh-oh, he's having a brain blast.
He's having a moment.
Like, ready, what is it? And I'll say, and I'll just say something like ham sandwich.
That's I've done the exact same thing. We've been on a road trip, and I'll tell my wife, can you text me this sentence? And she'll be like, what does that mean? Don't worry about it. Hopefully it'll make sense to me later. And she'll just text me these same ham sandwich,
Let's hope that it's not the line from a homicidal maniac saying that they're going to kill you later. And then the forensics are there and like, well, she certainly had intent,
I'm framing her this whole time.
So now that we're digging into your process, and your process, seems to include some sort of physical activity that allows your mind to be at rest and really sort of explore these characters that you've been internalizing, this problem that you've been internalizing. Let's pivot to now when you are actively engaged in the construction of sentences, the writing process that results in stuff people can read. How long does it take you in general to get from the idea that's been percolating, now you are writing it down, to kind of a finished product that you can show people? And give us a sense of, the drafting process that you go through. Like, just walk us through it.
I found myself to be more of a binge writer. I will write for hours and hours on end, but I can't be one of those writers who fits in a half hour here, 20 minutes there. And I'm a really slow writer, and maybe that's what I need. I need all that time to get stretched out and to figure out what I'm doing. My family and I used to incorporate, we kind of restarted it now, a thing I used to call Friday night writes. And I would binge write from like 8 p.m. sometime after dinner till like 2 or 3 in the morning. and my family is so supportive, and they kind of let me just check out in the office for those nights, and I would just completely throw myself into whatever I'm working on. The novel was written that way, late Friday nights. And it really depends on the piece. When, thinking about flash fiction, I feel like we're talking about two different things sometimes, the novel and then flash. I had a story published in The Forge maybe a year or so back that was only like 170 words, or it was it was a micro, it was really small, but I think it took me upwards of 6 or 7 months to write that piece. Something that small, every word matters, and I had trouble just nailing every sentence, and I'm so hard on myself. I didn't want to send it out if it was like 75% good or 75% done. I knew if something that short had every line be really good, and it took me 6 or 7 months to find those sentences. So I'm a terribly slow writer because I think I revise as I go. I write a sentence, I write a paragraph, and then I'll go back up to it and I'll read it again and make it right before I move on to the next paragraph, which I know is probably getting in my own way of maybe some creative momentum, but I've also found that it seems to work for me. I feel like I was all over the place with that answer, but
no, we try really hard not to be super prescriptive, because we recognize that people write in a bunch of different ways, and that the result is the most important part. But a lot of the quote unquote advice that we try to provide does seem to support, focused writing time is the way to go, and to have it scheduled allows your brain, the opportunity to set the world aside and focus on the thing. And so what you're saying is Friday nights was your opportunity to set the world aside and focus on the thing. And, I tend to write better in the morning than the evening, just because my mind isn't cluttered with the day's decisions. But everybody's different. So
I also heard some really great advice that ended up being really applicable to me and helped me a lot. And I feel so bad because I forget the author who gave this bit of advice. He came to one of the universities I was teaching at and gave a talk. And he said for him, when he sits down to write, it takes about 45 minutes of this like transition period where you're stuck, you sit down, you're not sure what to do, you can't really get into it. Some people call it writer's block, you're not inspired. And he says that's really just the day's activity still active in your brain, whether you're thinking about work or family or the news or whatever's going on. And he says he finds if he sticks with it and kind of like trusts the process, about 45 minutes in, that stuff quiets down and whatever he's working on kind of comes to the surface. And I feel like before he said that, I was like, yes, I do kind of give up sometimes after maybe 15, 20 minutes when I'm like, okay, it's not working today and I'll go on to something else. But after I heard that, and I was like, okay, let's at least give it these 45 minutes. And most of the time by then I'm fully immersed in something. So
you know what that is? That's the 82 Oldsmobile theory, which is if anybody has ever driven an old car, and especially in a cold climate, you have to go out and turn it on and let it warm up before you can drive it away. So that's all.
That's a great comparison.
I am always fascinated by the workspace itself. I'm always a big fan of seeing bands create in their little studio spaces. So can you tell us a little bit about how much the environment that you're writing in helps you, or if you're pretty easy, like, you know what, I couldn't make it out, to the office. I did spend an hour at the coffee shop, or what your workspace is like and how you optimize it.
If I'm writing new work, I am pretty particular that I do have to be in my office. It has to be clean and decluttered. I can't have loose bills or like other things that will distract my brain. I'm very fortunate to have a great space filled with like books and my dart frogs and a nice desk. And I think I'm able to edit though pretty much anywhere. I like to get out and go to coffee shops. And for some reason, if it's already down and I'm just tinkering with things, I can edit pretty much anywhere. But if I'm writing new work, I need quiet, I need declutter, I need my space.
You have dart frogs in your office?
I do. I have 3 blue poison dart frogs in cube, little glass vivariums that are in my office. I mean, Flash Frog is not just a name. There's the frogs behind the flash.
Now, in those trying moments when you're working through a particular sentence that's not working, do the poison darts help?
They do, because they are great. They're great to stare at and just kind of zone out and watch. They're such unique. They're like little aliens. They're such weird creatures that I will just kind of blink and zone out and watch them. When you kind of zone out, that's when the brilliance strikes.
We've picked at your process a bit. and I'm really interested in how you arrive at endings. So again, I've been introduced to your work. I've read some of it. I've really liked it. The endings, I want to know if you start off with an ending and you're writing towards it. Is it something that you discover? How do you know when you've reached the proper ending?
Sure. And I already can tell I'm probably not going to give that helpful of an answer, because I don't have a process when it comes to endings, and I definitely don't start with an ending and get to it. Every time I think I do have an idea for a great ending, and then I start the piece, it's going to end up somewhere else completely. So it's like, why do I even bother, thinking I have an ending ahead of time?
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I just kind of, when you know it when you're there. There's a certain sense that kind of comes over me when I feel I'm at the ending, and I can kind of maybe see it, 30 yards out. You're like, okay, I feel like we're getting there. And then I do find that I'm more drawn to ending with maybe a sharp image or an impactful image, something visual. I find myself leaning towards, rather than maybe dialogue or something too super reflective or internal, because I like that stuff to happen off the page. So I feel like once I'm getting to that home stretch, I start to think, okay, what is maybe my ending image or moment going to be?
Yeah, I could see that, because the endings that I read were kind of a shift in perspective. It wasn't an explosion of idea. It wasn't the bottom falling out of the world. It was sort of a realization or a shift in recognition. And
I'm really drawn, as a reader, I'm really drawn to pieces that don't, have everything neatly tied up at the end, that almost sometimes frustratingly to like my wife or daughter, when they're reading stuff that I pass to them, they're like, but what, it's too open-ended. What happens? I want to know. And I really like, and I'm drawn to pieces that have so much life after the page. So I think I try to do that in a lot of my work.
How about this? Art and I have been talking recently about relevance and what to you makes the work satisfying for you. I know that you were just talking about the fact that you're a slow writer and you really like to make sure that it's 100% good in for you, and not letting something out the door that's like just 75% there.
Right.
What makes it satisfying for you to have a piece that you finished and maybe not necessarily gets published, because sometimes that can be a bad hang up for folks. So what is that like for you?
I think because it's such an internal process for me in the beginning. Like I said, I live with these characters, or I live with the voice, or I live with the setting and the moment inside of me until I'm ready to like, okay, let's get this down on paper. Of course, it never comes as smoothly. There's something translating from your head to your fingertips where it doesn't always translate as smoothly. So then it's like, okay, how do I articulate what I thought I was creating here? So it almost becomes like a problem to solve, or like a puzzle to put together. But it's solving those problems or putting together those puzzles with words, which I'm a big word nerd, and I love language, and so I think there's selfishly, the process for me, I just love figuring that out. How am I going to get that emotion across only using words? I think is that's what really drew me to writing in the very, very beginning, way back when I was young, of like the fascination of like, I can take this completely blank white space and do something to it with only words that might make people laugh or cry or think about something in a new way, or that kind of thing blew my young mind that was possible. And so I think I'm forever kind of chasing that feeling of that possibility of what I can do simply with language on a blank sheet of paper. I don't know. So it's kind of this eternal chase to create that puzzle and that picture that might have those effects on people.
Yeah. The thing that Tim was referring to is something that we've kind of stumbled on the last month or so, where it really came out of the depths of my personal despair. And I asked him sort of pleadingly a particular question, and then he answered it in a refill. And then I came back in the next refill and said, thank you for the answer. So I kind of want to ask you the same question that we posed to Tim. And really it is about an individual idea, something that you've latched onto. These characters are interesting. This situation's compelling. I'm going to write it. So I'm actually pulled up the exact question that I asked him. So I'm going to ask you the same exact question. What
Uh-oh,
about,
okay.
I know, it's great. It's fun, right? You didn't know there'd be a quiz. Okay. What about the work that you are doing makes you feel like it matters so much that you want to finish it?
Man, that's a great question. Do I get to hear what Tim answered as well? Is that part of the quiz? I'm very curious to see what he wrote back.
Here's the thing. I don't even remember what I said.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question just so I can get the wording?
Oh, absolutely. And please, this is a very low stakes moment in time. Okay, it's fine.
No, but I want to answer it thoughtfully.
No, I appreciate that. So what about the work that you're doing makes you feel like it matters so much that you want to finish it?
Okay, so the context I put that in is I'm currently writing my second novel. I'm right in the middle of it, right in the dirty parts of it, and there's so much between the promotion for the new book that's coming out, for working on Flash Frog, family life and real life and all that stuff. But I'm obsessed with this second novel, so I'm kind of putting it in the context of your question: what is it about that second novel that matters to me so much that I'm making and finding time to make sure I continue that forward? And I think it's that, and this is going to sound kind of idealistic or romantic and maybe a little cheesy, but once I create these characters, I feel they're real people, and I feel like they're friends of mine, and I feel like once I start, I owe it to them to tell their story. And so I'm not be able to fully rest until I finish this novel and I know how their stories end. And I'm hoping, that's kind of the core of it. And I'm hoping somehow in the magic of it all, it will matter on a bigger scale, and it'll mean something to people who read it. And it might change the way they think about things or see things in a way they've never saw before. So I don't think in those terms when I'm writing, but I think of the terms of my commitment to these characters. Yeah. I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah. And I think that's a great answer, and it's inspiring in a way, because you have committed, so much to these characters that they are real to you. And how can they not be real to us if they're already real to you? And you're agonizing over every sentence. You're bleeding the stuff out anyway. So I think that's probably why your work feels so effortless, because of all that kind of front loaded time where you're really getting to know them as people. And then you're committing to, okay, well, this is a real person, so I'm going to write them faithfully. And then you execute that. So yeah, I think it's a great answer.
You said it much more efficiently than I did. I love the way you said that. Do you remember what Tim said back to you?
I think what I mentioned, I might have said is that I just like it if it feels cool. If I'm really enjoying the process, I really like that it feels that what I'm making is cool. I like it. I like, it's that sort of thing where I was always a very big fan that Beastie Boys were very, very obvious in showing you where they came from. The artists that made them, the artists that inspired them. And I love that kind of thing of being I love that movie. I love that book. I love that short story. I love that author. I want to try and steal some of that stuff and see how it goes through my own lens. So maybe I think that in all honesty, Eric and Art, I feel like your answer is so helpful, because one of the things that I have been very guilty of is gimmick over character. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of my stories don't work. And to sort of narrow down and focus on a character, I think to be honest, since a little bit of this is writing is therapy for me, I think maybe the pieces that do best is where I'm just sorting out my own shit. Because the character is essentially me.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Tim's early work was very much a rim shot, and it was really about the joke or the gag or whatever. And it worked for what it was, but, he's now exploring a different part of the human psyche, and he's doing, and getting a lot of things published as a result. He's doing it very well. So, my response to his response was to call it expressive individualism. He wants, hey, you can only be you, so you might as well go out and do it. So go for it. That's the reason to do it.
Eric, I'd just love to talk about Flash Frog a little bit, because, we did recently have Aaron Birch on from HAD, and I'm fascinated with it. How did you decide you wanted to start this publication?
Well, again, as we've kind of gone to a couple times, it started at the pandemic. At the time, I was on the staff of 2 different literary magazines as kind of a assistant editor. And at that time, I had spent many years teaching. I taught creative writing and did some editing, ran some workshops. And so, I mean, just for 20 years, I was reading, editing, teaching, writing, and all that stuff, and being on the staff of these magazines. And then having suddenly a lot more free time, I thought, you know what? I can do this in a little different way. It's almost kind of like, I guess, with any industry, like you want to be your own boss and you want to, be able to call the shots. And I was like, I think I have an idea for a magazine that might be a little unique or a little new. And then to repeat, apparently, my theme of being a very internal person, I thought about Flash Frog for probably 6 to 8 months before I actually told anyone or did anything about it, because I wanted to do it right. And I didn't want to do it on a whim and then, have it completely change or just kind of fizzle out. Or I wanted to make sure I committed to something that I was going to stick with. So I thought about it for a good 6 to 8 months until I finally said, yeah, this is something I want to do. And I kind of left those other magazines and jumped in fully into the deep end of Flash Frog. And then came a lot of the logistics of like, wait, I don't know how to make a website, and how am I going to get my word out there? I wasn't that big on Twitter yet, and I was like, how do I get the name out there, and how do I do also the nuts and bolts of it? But that kind of came, you kind of learn as you go and figure it out.
Yeah. When you start getting submissions, does it almost feel like you're picking works that you feel like, oh, I would have loved to have written this? Or can you talk a little bit more about how that process goes for you?
Absolutely. I didn't want to manipulate the Flash Frog into something that I had some kind of abstract idea about. Like, I really wanted to just publish stories that got me really excited. Publish stories that, just like you said, that, oh, I wish I had written that. Or publish stories like, God, I want to read that story again. Or let me call my friend and make sure they read the story. Because if I'm not super excited about it, then publishing it feels more like a job, and Flash Frog has never felt like a job. So yeah, I just, and I think maybe because, we all have our own specific taste, that just naturally stuff I got excited about maybe started building itself into a brand or a voice, as you called it.
What is the trajectory of the magazine? What do you plan to do with it? Like, is it just sort of a let's see what comes and we're going to have fun, or do you have grand designs on world domination?
Yeah, no, I don't. And I've been asked that before, and I don't have grand designs on expanding it into anything beyond Flash or doing some of the amazing stuff that other magazines, like Smoke Long, they're taking over the world in terms of Flash, and I love everything they're doing. But I don't see myself trying to do that. For one, I like keeping it small. I don't imagine having a staff of, 10, 20 people putting this together. And I don't imagine going into, poetry or creative nonfiction, because that's not what I get super excited about. So I think I just envision, ideally, if I'm looking into the future, I envision Flash Frog as something that people hopefully consider as a consistent, exciting source of new, fresh voices in Flash fiction. And I think you don't have to always be adding new elements to stay relevant or to stay important. So I'm kind of hoping maybe consistency and quality are things that I can focus on to keep us going.
Yeah. One of the things I'm always eager to ask when we have editors, what are you looking for? It'd be great. Our listeners are always trying to get published, and any tips or strategies that you can share with them to help would be probably benefit. One
thing I think if you read the magazine, you'll find is that I really am drawn to language and pacing and rhythm and how a story is told just as much as what story is told. As I've kind of mentioned earlier, I love things that give you life after the page. And especially with Flash fiction, so much of what makes it good and makes it work is the work that the reader's doing. So I think when you have a lot of the story happening off the page, that just makes what is on the page 10 times more important. So I find the stories that I'm drawn to, I can feel the author has really paid attention to every word. I'm not so drawn to stories that span a ton of time and get from point A to point B and have a lots of, plot points and twists and things like that. I think that that's hard to do in Flash fiction. And I do get a lot of those stories, and to me, they feel thin. And I'm turned off by stories that feel thin, that like, sometimes I feel stories that are sent in as flash are actually full short stories that were crammed into this container, and they had to rush to get from point A to point B in these, 600 words. And in that rushing, again, the story feels thin. And so I like to kind of marinate in moments and have the language do a lot of the work. So yeah. I don't know if that is at all helpful for submitting writers, but that is how I think about stories that I'm drawn to, as opposed to ones that I'm not.
Yeah, I think it is. The way that I think about what you said was the story should have an echo. So, the flash is
I like that. Yeah.
1,000 words or 500 words, and then boom, it lingers with you after you finished reading it. Maybe just for a moment or two as you're kind of considering the circumstance. You're playing out the plot that isn't there because you can kind of predict what's going to happen, or it assaults you later in the day and you're like, man, I can't get out. I got to go read that thing again because it grabbed me. Yeah. It's that. Right. It's an echo.
Yeah, no, again, you're right. Art has a way of putting things in really concise language that makes a lot of sense. I love the use of that echo. I'm going to steal that.
It also, in my experience with, submitting to publications, one of the things that you see so much might even be on every single lit mag you've ever read, is to read the lit mag itself.
Absolutely.
Which really is very beneficial, because I know for myself, I'll have a piece and I'm like, I did it. This is it. I know exactly where it's going to go. I don't know where it's going to go. It's going to 16 different lit mags,
right?
And 3 of them I've read. And I think that it really, really, really is very crucial for anybody out there that is thinking, hey, I'm just going to submit to Flash Frog without having read it. And then it doesn't go anywhere. So I really think that that's a big piece of advice, is to read it.
It really is. And it seems like it should be really obvious advice. But in reading as many submissions as I've read, it's not obvious advice, I guess. I mean, there's so many stories where within half a page, I was like, you have never read a single word of the magazine. And I know it's hard to be like, how am I going to read this many magazines, while I'm doing everything else in my life? But it's also saving you a lot of time. If you had read one story of Flash Frogs, that it's either not for you or it is for you. And so it's simple advice, but I think it's important that not everybody takes.
I'm a huge fan of Nine Inch Nails, who for the majority of their career was essentially one guy, Trent Reznor. I know that a recent development for you is to bring one of our old friends, Emily Rinkema, into the fold at Flash Frog. How easy was it for you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And because it is a new development, it's kind of the first time I've been asked that. And I'm excited to be able to share the process, because for the longest time I was, stubbornly, this is like my baby and I want control over it and blah, blah, blah. So I was doing it for 5 years by myself. And I just looked up right now. I think I read upwards of 20,000 submissions in those 5 years. And it takes a toll. And then I think what really, besides the fact that it's like, that's a lot of submissions to be reading, what kind of spurred this idea of adding somebody was the developments with my novel and all that I'm the Undertow has me doing. And then the second novel that I really want to write. And I was like, I really want to be a novelist, but I'm also in love with Flash Frog. It's like, how do I do all these things at once? And I thought, what if I added someone who I really trusted, and really cutting my submissions in half if we each read half of them and talked about them. And I also love the idea of being able to discuss works that we like and why things are working or why things aren't working. And that element was missing from my editorial process. But then I became really particular about, okay, but who? I don't want to just open up to everybody. And then what if I don't gel with somebody? So I kind of wanted to hand pick somebody. And Emily had published twice in the past with Flash Frog. And then, I mean, you guys are, I think, friends with her, right? You know her well. Like, she recently has been publishing like a fiend. She's just got something coming out all the time. And every time I read her work, I'm just like, yes, this is awesome. And even just kind of interacting with her or watching her on social media, I just felt like, okay, this is somebody whose writing not only do I greatly admire, but it's also someone who I would want to hang out with. I want to, be able to grab dinner with someone and you feel like you get along, and someone who would get that, what Flash Frog means to me. And I don't know, there was just a lot of factors that kind of had to line up, and she was the name that kept coming to mind. And so I reached out to her and just said, "Hey, I got this crazy idea. I have no clue if you're at all interested." And she wrote back right away with like all caps, "Yes, yes, yes. Oh my God, yes!" Exclamation points. And so I kind of felt like, okay, this is going to be a good fit. And we met and discussed, and she's like, I understand that Flash Frog is your baby, and I want to take care of it as such. And let me tell you, that was the best decision I have made. I say Emily has been a godsend. Well, I told her she's been a frog since. She has been so good with helping me and bouncing off ideas and taking off half the workload and seeing things that I don't see and confirming things that I'm unsure of. And it's just been a real joy. And I hope that she feels the same way.
That's awesome. So you were saying earlier that you had poisonous frogs, so she's the antidote.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask if you actually sent her one of the frogs for her own office. Look, welcome to the fold.
They do have babies, and so if they do, and I need to get rid of some, it's possible.